Welcome to Real Free News Podcast. Today we're covering the topic of the mechanisms enabling undocumented immigrants to access business and home loans in the United States and Canada, a critical analysis of self-perpetuating cycles and systemic facilitation. In the vibrant streets of America's cities, ethnic enclaves pulse with the energy of taco stands, corner stores, and cleaning services owned by undocumented immigrants who have seized an economic stronghold that overshadows the entrepreneurial efforts of native-born citizens, particularly white Americans. These newcomers, slipping through porous borders or exploiting lax immigration systems, wield a sophisticated array of financial tools to launch businesses and buy homes, outpacing native entrepreneurs who grapple with stricter regulations. Private loans tailored for those without legal status, grants from sympathetic organizations, and tight-knit community networks propel undocumented immigrants into retail and restaurant dominance, creating thriving ventures where native startups often falter. Official estimates count 15 million undocumented immigrants, though credible higher figures suggest 30 to 60 million, potentially doubling or quadrupling their economic impact. This advantage stems from a calculated system of institutional support, fraudulent schemes, and self-reinforcing cycles that prioritize immigrant communities over those rooted in American soil. These enclaves sustain their momentum by hiring co-ethnics, channeling profits to bring in relatives who perpetuate economic control. City programs, foreign consulates, and charities offer step-by-step guidance to navigate financial systems, providing access to capital that native-born Americans cannot match. Fraudulent practices, such as forged identities and sham arrangements, exploit oversight gaps, allowing undocumented immigrants to infiltrate loan programs meant for legal residents. Canada's parallel dynamic, with Indian immigrants flooding trucking and retail, amplifies this pattern through government-backed diversity initiatives that favor newcomers over native Canadians. Chain migration and ethnic favoritism fuel communities that wield growing political influence, reshaping the economic and cultural landscape. Native-born citizens lacking comparable community networks face a competitive disadvantage in launching small businesses, particularly in high-risk sectors like retail, where immigrant ventures thrive. This essay dissects these mechanisms through four lenses: legal loan pathways, fraudulent access methods, ethnic enclave cycles, and Canada's comparative model, exposing a systemic bias that empowers undocumented immigrants at the expense of native-born economic opportunities. Part 1. Legal pathways for undocumented immigrants to secure business and home loans. Undocumented immigrants in the United States secure business and home loans through legal avenues that exploit regulatory gaps, granting them a clear edge over native-born Americans. The Internal Revenue Service issues tax identification numbers, allowing immigrants without legal status to open bank accounts and apply for loans from private lenders or community-focused banks. These institutions offer business microloans at low interest rates, typically supporting ventures like food trucks and retail shops, and home mortgages with higher rates and substantial down payments, common in ethnic neighborhoods like Houston's Latino suburbs. Such financing thrives due to community trust and reliable repayments, unlike the stricter credit requirements faced by native entrepreneurs. Nonprofit organizations, partially funded by taxpayer dollars, amplify this access. California's grant programs provide small startup funds for undocumented entrepreneurs, while federal initiatives channel money through charities for microloans, exploiting a legal exemption that bypasses status checks. City offices in places like New York host workshops connecting immigrants to lenders, ensuring a steady flow of capital. Mexican and Salvadoran consulates offer free business planning sessions, linking immigrants to community-based financial institutions. Within enclaves, rotating savings pools and crowdfunding platforms leverage ethnic trust to seed startups, bolstered by remittances from abroad. These mechanisms enable undocumented immigrants to dominate low-barrier industries, where half their businesses operate, compared to native-born Americans who secure only a majority of federal loans despite their demographic dominance. This disparity fuels immigrant-owned businesses, while native entrepreneurs grapple with regulatory hurdles and higher startup costs, reinforcing an economic landscape tilted in favor of undocumented immigrants. Part 2. Fraudulent schemes exploiting loan systems for undocumented immigrants. Fraudulent schemes enable undocumented immigrants to bypass federal restrictions and secure loans, undermining native-born Americans who adhere to rigorous regulations. Forged tax identification numbers and passports, obtained through unlicensed advisors for steep fees, allow immigrants to pose as legal residents when applying for business and home loans. Legal cosigners, acting as fronts, access federal and minority-focused loan programs, siphoning off funds meant for citizens. A recent operation uncovered hundreds of cases involving sham marriages and fake documents used to secure loan eligibility, highlighting widespread deception. Social media scams on platforms like TikTok promise guaranteed loans for hefty fees, ensnaring thousands in schemes that exploit system gaps. Banks in ethnic enclaves, such as Miami's Cuban communities, accept consular identification cards with minimal scrutiny, driven by profit motives and anti-discrimination laws that prohibit blanket denials based on status. A massive backlog in immigration cases delays fraud detection, allowing undocumented immigrants to tap into loan programs intended for legal residents. Fake green cards unlock access to minority business funds, diverting millions annually through fraudulent means. Home loan fraud, including forged identities and sham cosigners, has fueled illicit mortgages, with one case involving substantial sums. Ethnic brokers within enclaves facilitate these schemes, leveraging community trust to provide forged paperwork. Native-born Americans, lacking such networks, face stringent verification, placing them at a competitive disadvantage in securing capital. This systemic exploitation, fueled by fraud and oversight failures, ensures undocumented immigrants gain financial resources that native entrepreneurs cannot match, perpetuating an uneven economic playing field. Part 3. Self-perpetuating cycles in ethnic enclaves driving loan access and business ownership. Ethnic enclaves create self-perpetuating cycles that empower undocumented immigrants to secure loans and dominate business ownership, marginalizing native-born Americans. Across numerous neighborhoods from Los Angeles' Latino districts to New York's Chinatowns, undocumented immigrants operate thriving businesses, primarily in retail and restaurants. These ventures hire co-ethnics at low cash wages, bypassing work verification laws and undercutting native businesses burdened by compliance with minimum wage and tax regulations. This labor advantage allows immigrant-owned businesses to flourish, while native startups face high failure rates due to regulatory costs. Chain migration brings relatives to join these businesses, with remittances funding new arrivals and startups, reinforcing economic dominance. Naturalized or second-generation immigrants in key roles, bank managers, nonprofit leaders, or city officials, prioritize co-ethnic lending, referring undocumented immigrants to tax ID loans. Community credit unions have disbursed millions in such loans, outperforming standard loans in repayment, incentivizing banks to continue lending. Political influence from naturalized immigrant voters further entrenches these cycles, pushing sanctuary city policies that protect access to financial resources. Cities like New York allocate substantial budgets for immigrant services, providing legal aid and lender referrals. These mechanisms sustain enclave economies, employing newly arrived co-ethnics who enter through family petitions or irregular means, often aided by fraudulent documents. Native-born Americans, lacking comparable community networks, struggle to compete in low-barrier sectors, where only a majority of federal loans go to white citizens despite their demographic dominance. This cycle of economic and political reinforcement ensures undocumented immigrants maintain a competitive edge, perpetuating their economic foothold at the expense of native-born opportunities. Part 4. Comparative Insights from Canada's Immigration-Driven Loan Access and Industry Dominance. Canada's immigration system, particularly its influx of Indian immigrants, illuminates the mechanisms enabling undocumented immigrants in the United States to dominate industries through loan access. Indian newcomers have seized control of retail, restaurants, and trucking, particularly in regions like Brampton, where they operate a significant share of businesses. Government-backed banks offer substantial loans to immigrant startups, while diversity programs provide wage subsidies and settlement funds accessible to visible minorities like Indians. These initiatives, rooted in Canada's equity laws, enable entrepreneurs to hire co-ethnics at low wages, undercutting Native Canadian workers. Fraudulent schemes amplify this access, with thousands of Indian students linked to fake colleges and costly job permit scams, as reported by Canada's Immigration Agency. Indian-led bank branches in Toronto prioritize co-ethnic lending, leveraging multicultural policies to facilitate loans with minimal scrutiny, mirroring U.S. enclave banks. Canada's chain migration, driven by family sponsorships, sustains enclave growth, with remittances funding new arrivals and startups, akin to U.S. patterns. The political influence of Indian parliamentarians ensures continued support for these programs, reinforcing ethnic economies. Cross-border spillover intensifies this dynamic, with Indian immigrants crossing from Canada to the U.S., exploiting asylum backlogs, while U.S. visa delays push others north. Both nations' lax enforcement sustains these cycles, with Canada's formalized diversity policies amplifying ethnic dominance. Native-born workers, particularly white Americans and Canadians, face wage suppression and job displacement in low-skill sectors, as immigrant-driven economies prioritize co-ethnic hiring and loan access, creating a systemic disadvantage that perpetuates immigrant economic control. Conclusion: fraud and networks empower undocumented immigrants. The relentless economic ascent of undocumented immigrants in the United States, mirrored by Indian immigrants in Canada, unveils a troubling reality where legal loopholes, fraudulent schemes, and ethnic networks empower newcomers to outpace native-born citizens in business and homeownership. Through private loans, nonprofit grants, and community funding, undocumented immigrants dominate retail and restaurant sectors, creating vibrant enclaves that hire their own and fund further migration. City programs, consulates, and charities provide tailored guidance, offering access to capital that native-born Americans, constrained by regulatory burdens, cannot match. Fraudulent practices, forged identities, and sham cosigners exploit oversight gaps, infiltrating loan systems meant for legal residents, while Native entrepreneurs face stringent compliance that stifles their ventures. Canada's experience with Indian immigrants controlling trucking and retail through government-backed diversity initiatives underscores this dynamic where ethnic favoritism and lax enforcement amplify immigrant economies at the expense of Native workers. The cross-border flow of immigrants and tactics between the two nations perpetuates these cycles, reshaping communities into strongholds of immigrant influence. Native-born citizens, particularly white Americans and Canadians, lack the community-driven networks that propel immigrant success, leaving them marginalized in low-skill sectors where wage suppression and job displacement prevail. This systemic bias, fueled by chain migration and political clout, ensures undocumented immigrants maintain an economic edge, anchoring enclaves that challenge the sovereignty and fairness of both nations' economic landscapes, leaving native-born citizens to navigate an uneven terrain where their opportunities are systematically diminished. Thank you for listening to the Real Free News Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment on how this is affecting your community. Visit realfreenews.com for more real free news and content on similar subjects. See you next time on the Real Free News Podcast.